Hello, everyone. Welcome to Plots and Politics. My name is Corinne Strait. I am here with Sarah Blessed. We are so excited to be joining you on this awesome Friday afternoon. Hope you're having a good week. We are going to talk today about Hamilton County, Indiana, which has gotten some unusual attention from two really completely unrelated events, but they do have some similarities that kind of sheds a light on some of the belief systems and the systems that are in place in a more conservative state like Indiana. So I'm excited to get into all of it. How are you doing, Sarah?
I am doing fantastic. Thanks for doing this. I know nothing about this episode, so I am excited.
Okay, so let me start with asking you a question.
Go for it.
Where are you in the true crime world?
Um, I like some stuff, but not as much as you do. I like the I like the funny show. What is it called? There's a funny show where they have a serial killer that makes a podcast with a regular family.
Oh, I don't know that one.
It's pretty funny. I can't think of the name. I think it's on Peacock maybe, and it's that one amazing actress, Kaylee Cuoco.
Cuoco?
Cuoco, yeah, I love
Okay.
her. She's amazing. So
She's
it's her
good.
show. She's got 2 seasons of it. So I like the
Oh,
spin on let's do a podcast, but we accidentally got the serial killer involved and he's doing the podcast.
okay. I probably need to check that out because I do not know. I don't know that show.
But
Um,
yeah, I know you're way more into it than I am. I do know that about us since we're
I
friends.
yes, we are good friends, and that is. I mean, we share a lot of similarities. But my love of true crime definitely is. And I won't say love as if it's a good thing. It's more of an interest and a fascination. And I know I'm not alone. There are a lot of women. This is a predominantly, women dominated space, at least as far as conversations go. And I have been a true crime a follower, probably, I mean, since my much younger years, watching things like Dateline or 2020 on
So
TV.
my husband is a true crime person.
Oh,
He's
okay.
huge. So if when you meet in person, you guys will have that giantly in common.
Oh my God, we could probably talk forever.
And I get annoyed. I've seen people that could be a little trolly online
Yes.
put down women for watching these programs. And I'd like to point out one of the reason we watch them is because we are worried that's going to happen to us. And we're like, what will we do if we meet someone? How would we handle it? It's to prepare us. So
Mhm.
before you troll us, look at the crime rate and the murder rate for women and then go back to your little judgmental place and hit delete, 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 delete. That's just,
Mhm.
side note for that.
And there is there's been a lot of really fascinating research on why certain people gravitate towards true crime, why some people are interested in it and some people are not. And I have found some of the research shows that people who are in times of high stress or in high stress environments actually gravitate more towards true crime because it feels like it matches their energy a little more. And it feels as if it's almost an escape because if something as horrible is happening in your life, you can watch something that's horrible. There
Yes.
is some research on that. I have found, I will say, over the last 5 or 6 years or so, as I have transitioned out of what used to be a very high stress environment in my life and I just have a very different life now than I did several years ago, that I do find it harder to consume certain content that
Yeah.
I had no problem consuming 10 years ago.
Yeah.
um,
What I watched in the pandemic is different than what I watch now, too. Different
yes,
place.
it's a different place in our heads. And I have always been, the most interesting part for me when it comes to true crime is what victims are taken seriously, what victims are focused on, what victims are not, and different elements and different time periods that we can see of different attackers, perpetrators who have looked at certain people and said, that's my victim profile because I know law enforcement's not going to pay attention to them. And seeing some of this change over time. Thankfully, some of it has changed and some of it has not, unfortunately. And That has always been really interesting to me because we rely upon law enforcement to handle these things. We need law enforcement to serve justice, but we also know how many times law enforcement can let us down and has let us down.
Especially culturally, when we're still far behind, when we're still very judgmental on groups of people, on minorities of some sort.
Yep.
Yes, and so now there's so much true crime stuff available because for so many years, the people with the positions of power were not investigating people that didn't we culturally didn't care about as
Yep.
much as other people. So yeah, it makes sense for why there's a boom now, especially with having so much content on the internet and on TV. It
Yep.
totally makes sense. Yeah.
And being an Indiana girl, I have been fascinated with a couple of main cases from Indiana for quite some time. One of them is, have you ever heard of Belle Gunness?
No.
Ooh, okay. So I'll go ahead and tell you about Belle Gunness because this is an old one, and then we'll get into the main topic. But Belle Gunness was an immigrant, came to the United States, and she bought a farm in LaPorte, Indiana, which is actually only like an hour west of me. So it's kind of north central Indiana. They're in central time zone where the rest of us are eastern. So they're kind of in the Chicagoland loop. She bought a farm there, and she would place help wanted ads in the paper looking for farmhands. And all of these farmhands would disappear. And so there, yes, and she is quite an interesting character, a very sturdy woman. I'm guessing she's built. I'm built a lot like Belle Gunness was. She's a very sturdy woman. I believe she was Norwegian, and she would bond with other immigrants that were coming over to the U.S. and to Indiana and offer them work. And pretty much she would just rob them. She would rob them blind.
Wow.
And yes, so there is a dispute on how many people she killed, but she was one of the most prolific serial killers that people really hadn't heard of until this gentleman that I'm not even gonna say gentleman, this piece of shit that we're gonna talk about today. I want to look up the book for you because I bet Chris would love it too. Um,
Yeah.
it is I read it on vacation last year. I read the entire book in 1 week, and it's
Oh,
one of my favorite authors. Because because when I look for a true crime author, I look for somebody who is not glorifying the perpetrator. I am not
I
there
get it.
there
Yeah,
yeah,
I don't
there
yeah,
was
because
a
that was a real trend for a really long time, and I feel like it's shifting now where you're like,
yes.
"How did they do it? They're so smart and amazing." And it's
Oh,
like, maybe
mm-mm.
we shouldn't be glorifying this. Maybe we should be like, "Why weren't they caught? Why weren't they stopped?" Because the law officials, they didn't care as much about the victims, that's
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So
And
I
I
feel
will
like things are
also
getting a little better now,
They are
don't you?
getting better. And I will plug one of my favorite like true crime history podcasts, which is called Last Podcast on the Left. And they do amazing research. They do very long series. They have been podcasting for over 15 years. I mean,
Wow.
they were kind of in it maybe even close to 20
That's
years
sort
now.
of how podcasts got famous at the beginning was true
Yeah.
crime stuff.
And they do awesome investigative like deep dives, and they every time they approach a serial killer, they always approach it with, we are taking the mask off of this person. This is not about glorifying them. They are not a quote evil genius. They are not diabolical. These people are idiots. They are depraved, and they just took advantage of the time they were in. And we can't put them up on this pedestal as if it is, yeah, this diabolical evil genius. Look how smart they are. They operated in a time period. They looked a certain way. They got away with what they did. So there is I like that unmasking that they
Did you
do.
know you know, when I was getting divorced, so Micah was around 2, so around 2012-ish, um, there was a serial killer that was caught a couple blocks from the school where I taught, and he actually ended up murdering one of my students' grandmothers. And I was living in that neighborhood right before he was caught because I was sharing the house with my ex while we were getting divorced, and then, like, saw the, like, caution tape and stuff. And
Mhm.
I don't know whether they've done a good job of figuring out how many people the guy murdered like that. So I have had a real encounter with a serial killer in my life.
Which is
I
pretty fascinating. I
know.
knew he was a 3 I knew he was a 3 namer. I was trying to find his name
I can't
here.
remember his name, but he was
William
in New
Clyde
Albany.
Gibson.
What, the
William
one
Cly
I'm talking about?
William Clyde Gibson.
So, yeah. So the grandmother, she like helped him and was like motherly towards him and stuff. And then he killed her, and then he was like a truck driver, and so they were trying to figure out how many other people he was sort of out of it, and he admitted to a lot of stuff, but he was sort of out of it, so it was hard to tell whether what he was saying was true or not. I don't know whatever happened to it, but I just remembered that. I had stuffed that down deep in my brain. Oh yeah, I had my own sort of weird encounter with, I
That's
mean, not too close, but
But that is close. I mean, yeah, so he is currently incarcerated. He is on death row in Indiana. He's actually in the Michigan City prison, which is
wow,
an
close to you.
hour away from me.
Wow.
And he's 67 years old. So he has an estimated number of victims from 3 to 33. But I believe he was only convicted of 3. And
Wow.
yeah, he's sitting on death row. So
I
yeah,
just feel so sorry for the victims' families.
yeah. It's that's what when you really start to dive into these stories, the collateral damage is just unbelievable, and it's the ripple effect. It's not just taking one life, it's also it's the whole ecosystem around the victim, it's the whole ecosystem around the perpetrator, because they have family and friends and sometimes children, who the infamous BTK, Dennis Rader, his daughter has grown up and has done a lot of writing and talking about being the daughter of a serial killer, because Dennis Rader was infamously, a Boy Scout leader and a church deacon, and he had really two separate
Wow.
lives. And she had no idea. She and her siblings and her mother had no idea. And so there's an entire disruption that happens that is felt for generations. So let's get into
Yeah, let's
the
do
main
it.
topic today. So in the 1990s, um, it was 1995, I believe, I think, 1995. A
I was
man.
14.
Oh, you were 14. Okay, I
Yeah.
was, yeah. What was I? 95. I would have
11?
been 14. I would have been 13. Yeah.
Oh,
Um, and I a man named Mark Goodyear goes to the police, and he says, I had this encounter with this man. He took me to his house. Um, he tried to give me a drink. I thought that it might be drugged. I didn't take it, but I really think this dude is up to something. I think something is going on there. This turned into an investigation that would have the second number of most unidentified remains after 9/11. So September 11th, 2001, there are still tens of thousands of unidentified remains of victims. This location in Hamilton County, Indiana, in Westfield, Indiana, has the second largest number of unidentified
wow.
remains ever that we know
Wow.
of. That we know of.
In
Um,
Hamilton County, is that where Carmel is?
yes, yes.
So
Hamilton
it's
County is
so it's close to
Carmel.
Indy.
Yes, it's northwest of
Okay.
Indianapolis, and it is yeah, it has Westfield in it, and Westfield is where the property called Fox Hollow Farm is located.
Okay.
So Herb Baumeister is the suspected killer, and the only reason I'm going to say suspected is because he never was convicted,
Oh,
and
wow.
there still is a lot of there are a lot of unanswered questions, as there are. Um, Herb Baumeister was a family man. He was married. He had 2 children, and he owned a series of stores in the Indianapolis area called Save-A-Lot stores. There are some like Save-A-Lot groceries that I've seen around here, but these were not grocery stores. These were thrift stores. So it was kind of like a Goodwill or a Salvation Army store with clothing and other used items. And he and his wife bought this giant property called Fox Hollow Farm in Westfield, Indiana. It's a huge, huge property, and it's a huge mansion. It's a big old house that has still has an indoor pool.
So
Um,
he's wealthy?
yes. Mhm.
Okay.
At least he was at that time enough to afford a piece of property like this.
Okay.
There are some, there is some talk of financial troubles and things like that. But yeah, he at least could afford this. And by all accounts, on the outside, he was just a regular family man. And people really didn't know a lot about him. He was kind of an odd dude. He really kept to himself. He did some kind of weird things. There are different people that he have worked for that just, it was weird accounts. And he was known to frequent gay bars in the Indianapolis area in the late 80s and early 90s. And the reason this is really interesting when you look kind of at the scope of history with LGBTQ rights and marginalization, and that is honestly is still happening. But to think of this being in Indiana in the 1990s feels way too recent. I mean, when you hear this story, you think, okay, this is the 40s or the 50s or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
This is the 90s. And there was a series of murders that happened on Interstate 70, which runs really east west. It runs between Indianapolis and Ohio. There were a series of murders that Baumeister is also suspected of committing. He has upwards of 25 victims, split kind of into 2 categories. So there were the Interstate 70 killings, and then there were the killings that took place at his home. And the story, or at least the details that have been pieced together, is that he would pick up men in bars in Indianapolis, say, hey, come back to my house with me. He would do it when his wife and kids were not home. They would go visit her family quite often. So there was, a timeline matchup of when he was doing this. And he would take them down to the cool indoor pool, which, of course, an indoor pool is kind of fun. He would take them down to the indoor pool. He would give them a drink, usually drug them. And then they would ultimately die most of the time because Herb strangled them. And
Wow.
he would kind of, it would always kind of start as like a sex game, as if it was like an erotic asphyxiation kind of thing. Asphyxiation. That's not an easy word to say. So this story is not very well known, and he is not very well known. I mean, you think of somebody like a Jeffrey Dahmer or a John Wayne Gacy or a Ted Bundy.
Yeah. We
This
hear those names all the
all
time.
the time. And so we're talking about 25 victims here. And there were several mistakes that were made by law enforcement at this time, because can you just imagine starting to unearth what turns out to be tens of thousands of pieces of bone on someone's property? They had found hundreds of pieces of bone on his property after this tip from this guy named Mark. And they didn't immediately arrest him. He took his son to a cabin away from home to like stay for the weekend or whatever. And once all of this information is coming out and all of these pieces are being gathered, his wife panics and is like, oh my God, he has our son away from home. Police go to the cabin, they get the son, and they leave. Why they didn't arrest him? They claim they didn't have enough evidence at the time to get a warrant. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. You find one human bone on somebody's property and you take them in and you hold them until you figure it out. It turned out to be over 10,000 pieces of bone. And this is the opportunity that Herb
And
needed.
Ethan, our friend Ethan, who's a lawyer, has been on making amazing
Hey,
content.
Ethan.
And he says not just several mistakes, he says hundreds of mistakes. They're still making mistakes about this case. So that's interesting.
They are still making
Um,
mistakes about this case. Absolutely. I'm so glad you're here, Ethan. Um, and so the mistakes really, I mean, from the jump began. And so these are just the mistakes or oversight or even incompetence that was happening once the investigation started. This was the opportunity that Baumeister needed once they took his son back home. He ultimately fled to Canada
oh
and
wow.
died by suicide, took his own life.
Was it recent after that?
It was immediately after that. Yeah, it was just in a few. I
So
think he
he
lived
knew
for
he
another
was going
couple.
to be caught. He
Yeah.
knew he was going to be arrested.
Yes.
And because they didn't arrest him when they had time, we don't know. We could have maybe gotten some information from him. I don't know
Yes.
whether he even knew these people's names or well, I don't know what he could have, but I mean, he could have given more information to the police and then helped these poor families that are suffering the loss of their loved ones.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I wonder, do you think the fact that he was wealthy made them hesitant to arrest them? Because I just see cases all the time where the people don't have a lot of money and they get arrested for, having a migraine pill in their pocket because they didn't have the prescription bottle on them.
Yeah.
And they get arrested for that. And then here we have bones in their yard and they're not arresting
Yeah.
the person.
Yep, and there is, and Ethan makes a good point. There is the they were in fragments. A lot of these had been in fragments. They had been burned. There were lots of attempts to completely destroy the evidence. But at least from what some of the investigators and the forensic team in the early part of the investigation, it was very obvious these bones were human and the pieces that they were finding. So there should, at least in hindsight, it
So
looks like there was probable cause.
how many years was he committing killings?
So they don't know for sure. It could be as long as from like 1978, maybe up. It looks like he started the I-70 string of killings was maybe in the early to mid 80s. And then this next set of the folks that ended up, the men that ended up on his property, is over the span of, I think, like 7 years. So maybe between 88 and 92, 93, 94. And it looks, one of his last suspected victims was in the end of 93.
Huh.
So, yeah, so this was over. And again, all of this is kind of fuzzy because
Right. We don't know for sure.
we don't know exactly how many people. We don't know his exact involvement, because there is some question of whether or not he acted alone, and
Oh,
did he act alone the entire time.
right.
Um, and the reason that kind of a lot of people are getting to know this case now is because there's a documentary that just came out on Hulu called Fox Hollow Murders, and
Oh.
it just came out this year. And again, the reason we don't know about this case is because he took his own life before he could be prosecuted. And interestingly, he right before he took his own life, he was pulled over by a Mountie in Canada, so a member of the police in Canada, and pulled him over to see if anything was wrong. I think his car was stopped or something and didn't know what he was doing. He said he was fine. He went on his way. So he did have an interaction with law enforcement in Canada, and that Mountie said that when I pulled him over, the back seat of his car was full of videotapes. Like he had boxes of videotapes. Those tapes have never been recovered. And
Huh.
so they were most like he probably burned them, destroyed them before he took his
Right.
own life.
This
So
is
there is some suspicion that there was evidence or some kind of documentation of what he did or the encounters that he had. Um,
and then
as
I wanna
Yep,
say Lady Blind Wolf is making amazing comments here. She says, "To be honest, they're still finding parts. They were finally
yep,
able to identify one victim a few years ago." Then she said, "He
yep,
lived not far from my grandfather's house, so I know a lot about him." And
yep,
then she said there are 3 documentaries.
yep.
Um, And then this is interesting. The cops came with a warrant so they could go through my grandfather's backyard and go search the woods behind my grandpa's house looking for bodies.
Yeah.
Wow. So
Yeah,
yeah, glad
there's
you're watching this show.
yeah, and I will say that I don't remember the name of the other 2 documentaries. I know I watched one of them. I didn't think it was very well done. It was very sensational, which you kind of get a lot of times in these stories. I think this one is a little it's done a little better. It's better quality. There are still some very questionable characters in this story that are still
Interesting.
alive from what I can see.
Wow. So
Um,
this might, we're going to be hearing more about it then since there's a new show out.
yes,
Um,
yep. And
Ethan said the videotapes that Goodyear said films the pool. So,
that's what Goodyear says. Yep. And
interesting.
so that's kind of where we have someone who is still absolutely Ethan. Goodyear is super suspicious. So Mark Goodyear is the person who initially we thought was kind of the hero of this story because he
Uh-huh. Because
exposed
he,
Herb.
okay. Mm-hmm.
We have now learned over the last couple of years through his own admissions that Goodyear says, oh, actually, I had a relationship with Herb for over 2 years. And I actually brought people back to the house. So it's very questionable what involvement Herb had, or I'm sorry, Mark had. Um, but if you watch the documentary, you will see Mark. Yeah, Mark Goodyear he seems to be not a well person. Um, he takes the filmmakers on a tour of the house because the house is still there. Somebody new owns it. I also have some feelings about the owner of that house. But Mark Goodyear takes the filmmakers on a tour of the house, and he looks so comfortable in that house. He looks very at home. He looks like he spent a lot of time there. He takes his shoes off. He's walking around in bare feet, like he's acting like this. I know this home. And there's another account of a survivor who says, Mark picked me up at a bar, said that he was house sitting for his boss and took me back to the house. So we do have some evidence that Mark was at least picking some people up. From what people can tell, because Mark Goodyear has not really been in, we don't really know what he looks like until this documentary. He's done other interviews before, but he's never shown his face. But back in the day, back in the 90s, Mark Goodyear was kind of like your typical young, attractive looking dude, very different from what Herb Baumeister looked like. And so it would make sense that maybe Mark would have acted like a bait or something and gone to these bars.
Right. Okay, Lady Blindworth is giving us a lot of information.
Mhm.
She said she lived in Hamilton County for a few years and used to go to Lattimore. Am I saying it right? In Fox Hollow.
Lattimore. Mhm.
And she used to job shadow when she had to go to Carmel. And then she said she actually had a friend who became one of the victims and was killed by him.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's one that's been proven. And then she said that the ex-wife kept it secret and had found body parts and just kind of kept it secret.
Yeah.
So this is
Yeah.
all
There was the wife, one of the kids was playing in the backyard with a friend and found a skull, like
oh
a
my
whole skull,
gosh.
and took it to his mom. And she didn't say anything. This was a couple of years before everything was discovered. It's really complicated. There's a couple of interviews with the wife. It's just really complicated because by all accounts Herb was a terrible husband. He was abusive and he was very controlling. And so who knows what state she was in? Who knows
Right.
what
I
kind of
mean, it sounds
agency
like
she
she's in
felt she
survival
had?
mode. She's in
Yeah.
survival mode trying to protect herself and her
Yep.
kid. Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
which is honestly why she took her kids away so much and went and spent so much time with her family, was just to get away from him.
Right.
So we don't know to what extent she felt, threatened or scared. But it is, I mean, it's crazy. It's really, really scary. And I mean, I bumped on this a little bit before, but we'll go back to it because one of the main reasons that this went undiscovered for so long and these people kept going missing was they were gay men. And this was still in a time, which again, this is the 90s, y'all. Um, People are hanging out at gay bars in the Indianapolis area. They are using pseudonyms. They are not using their real names. So when you start to try to investigate something like this,
Oh yeah.
it's really twisted. And a lot of there are several families that
Oh.
are interviewed in this documentary and in other documentaries, and they reported their loved ones missing to police. A lot of these people knew their loved one was gay and they didn't care. They're just like, hey, I haven't seen my brother. I haven't seen my son. Of course, there was no attention paid. They kept a list of people who were reported missing, but most families got the typical, well, I'm sure they just ran away. They met somebody and they ran away kind of response.
Yeah,
And
and if these would have been your typical, family man making a decent income and lived culturally the way that was appropriate for the 90s, maybe the cops would have looked into it and maybe we could have saved some people's lives, right? We could have
mhm,
had less murders. Um, yeah.
yeah,
And yeah. And like, I imagine there's lots of serial killer stories we still don't know about because we don't care enough about the victims, maybe. Like, they haven't decided culturally that that's going to be a money making story, you
yep.
know? Um, so
And
it's
it really it takes individual heroes sometimes to step up and actually make it important to people. And in the US and in Canada, there is a huge problem, especially of Indigenous women going
oh
missing.
yeah.
And where they do not get any attention paid to them. And their names, no reporter is even taken. We know there are plenty of victims of color, whether they are Black or Latino, that go missing that do not get attention. And so there is kind of a in law enforcement world a hierarchy of who is taken seriously as a victim and who is not. And so much of this depended on the individual officer that is responding to the call. I just did a video earlier this week about the history of the rape kit because I was listening to a podcast about an author, and there's this woman. She's from Chicago. Marty Goddard, and she wanted to formalize the process of collecting evidence after an assault because there was no formal process. And interestingly, the Playboy Foundation is actually gave her the money so she could launch this project, which is because there were no nonprofits willing to help her in the 1970s when she's talking about rape. So, but up until that point, up until a formalized process for collecting evidence was done, it was up to the discretion of the individual responding officer to decide whether or not this victim was credible and whether or not evidence would be collected. So obviously a very subjective system. So if anyone is suspected of being a sex worker, if it's a woman of color, if it's a woman who's been drinking, if it's a what the officer would say, nope, really kind of probably your fault. So I'm not going to take any evidence. So it took the power away. It took some of that subjectivity away from the officer. We have a very similar situation happening with all of these victims. It's up really to the individual officer. You call, I want to file a missing persons report. They decide, so they're gay and they're hanging out at bars. Okay, well, that's a high risk lifestyle. So we are probably not going to take this seriously.
Yeah.
They probably ran
The
away.
the judgment, the
The
judgment.
judgment.
And this just shows how important it is that we pay attention to local elections, that we are electing a very good sheriff, and that they are hiring high quality police officers. A
Mhm.
new problem that I didn't realize until I became friends with a police officer, Jason Kerberg, who's running for sheriff in Floyd County. I did not realize how much their reputation has been tarnished because of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's such a complex, complicated problem because, yes, cops can be bad and do bad things and people can die because of them. That is definitely true. But it doesn't mean all cops are bad. And I remember getting way far to the left during the Black Lives Matter and being thinking all cops were bad. I remember
Mm.
thinking that for a while. I do not think that anymore. And it really helped to meet local cops around my community and realize they're doing their best to protect me. But something I didn't realize, did you know this is a problem? We have trouble in the state of Indiana hiring cops,
Oh, yeah,
finding
we have a huge
enough.
shortage. Mhm.
Because if the culture thinks all cops are bad, why would you want to do that job?
Mhm.
We have that problem with teaching too, since so many people want to harp on public education with teachers. We're having trouble getting teachers now. So I did not realize that was a problem until recently. We need good people, moral, brave people to step up and be police officers. Well, we need to be not on the right and not on the left. We need to be on the people's side of hiring good quality police officers, hiring really good sheriffs, and then supporting them and kind of calling out the ones when they're not great, which is hard to do because they have a lot of power.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
it's really, I think when we look at law enforcement and when we talk about policing and the history of policing, we have to look at it not necessarily as an individual problem. I think sometimes it's characterized as good apples and bad apples. Like there's a bad apple in the police department, but it's really a system. And so when we talk about systemic issues within law enforcement and within policing, there are plenty of good people who work in the profession and who have dedicated their lives to the profession. There is a culture. There is a culture of um, racism, misogyny, predatory behavior sometimes with certain victims or witnesses. And that culture takes a long time to reverse. And there are definitely some additional steps that could be taken to rectify some of the wrongs of the past and to kind of work on the system that was created, because until we reform the full system, which takes a very long time, until we reform the whole system, these good people that are working within it are going to continue to be quieted and silenced. And that's one of the hardest parts, because if you've, as somebody who's worked, I mean, I've been doing some videos on some wrongful convictions that
Oh, I saw
I'm
that.
not
I
an
was watching
attorney,
right before.
but
Yeah.
we worked for the city of Elkhart when these exonerations were coming out. And what I started to learn, which I'm sure, yes, Ethan, I just did one this morning. Um,
An episode about the
the
Wolverines.
Wolverines. It's a rogue group of racist cops in Elkhart. That there are a bunch of people who have been wrongfully convicted in the city of Elkhart. What's interesting about that situation to me is that yeah, Elkhart has a problem. I would I would reckon that if we did the same investigation for many cities around the country, we would also find similar problems, because we know there are a lot of people who are in prison who should not be there. And Elkhart, Indiana has had a spotlight shown on it because there's a group of attorneys that are working really, really hard on an innocent project to exonerate these folks. And
Yeah.
so they're dedicating their resources to this. And every time one of these convictions was overturned, I just thought of like, okay, what about the people in Fort Wayne? What about the people in
It's
Columbus,
only
Ohio?
the very, very few that get
Yep.
these amazing lawyers that dedicate their time and take a big risk,
Yep.
to try to save these innocent people. So thank you to all those lawyers that are doing that work. That's amazing. But there are lots of
We need
people in
so many
jail
more of them. Oh, there are
that
so many
didn't do
people.
it,
Yep.
or there's so many poorer people that did little crimes that are stuck in prison for a long, long time, when people with money do money worse things and
Hmm.
maybe face no jail time or very little. It's just not equal. That's the main problem I have. um the aspect of the money,
Yeah.
we're locking up people if they don't have a lot of money. We just want them to go away. We don't want to help them be working members in society and have a job, and we just want to get rid of them. And then if you are not a great person with money, it is much harder for them to get convicted of a similar or much worse crime.
Yep.
So that's the main thing I have a problem with. And I don't see a lot of legislative changes being made to lessen it. So locally, the best things we can do are we can pay attention to who our judges are. We
Mhm.
go and we get to vote whether to keep judges in, research who those judges are, find people that know about them, and then pay attention to those sheriff's races
Mhm.
locally, and then pay attention to what people say about your police officers. I feel pretty fortunate where I'm at down here that the majority of them are doing a good job.
Mhm.
Um, I have, and people tell me all kinds of stuff around here. So I get all these private messages all the time, and I can say that the counties around me are pretty decent, except we had the Jamie Knoll scandal,
Yep.
which we could even
Yep.
do an episode on that sometime if we wanted to, because we've never gone on much about it other than mentioning it for Project Next. But Jamie Knoll was the sheriff of Clark County, and he took at least $5 million of
At
taxpayer money,
least.
and he hurt so many people, and people died because of him because he was making money off of bad ambulance services, 911 services. So anyway, it's interesting because I heard so many terrible local stories about Jamie Knoll and the people he hired to be police officers,
Mhm.
but now I also hear lots of really good stories about the police officers around here too. So,
Yep.
yeah, it's a complex issue.
It is. It is. And I mean, and Ethan here, legendary lawyer in the chat, is a public defender. Everyone deserves a defense attorney. That is our constitutional right, and public defenders do, really do great work. And they are given to people who need an attorney. When you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. And things that Ethan has talked about before of different legislative things that could help driving privileges, helping people get driving privileges, because so many people are pulled over for no license, and then they're in the system and it just snowballs. And also
They get
my
one offense, then they
Yep.
get pulled over again, and then it adds, and then it's like, look at you, you're a menace to society.
And they're just trying to go to work. And also minor, cannabis offenses. And so, Indiana not legalizing marijuana, and people are still
Oh,
getting
so
arrested.
many people are in jail for that,
Yep.
when in lots of other states, they're not being thrown in jail for that. It does
Yep.
seem like a waste of our taxpayer money to be going after these people.
It sure is. It sure
Uh,
is. Yep.
yeah.
So going back to Baumeister, um, because he took his own life and wasn't prosecuted, that's a large reason why we don't know we don't really know who he is. A lot of people don't know who he is. And then the other piece of it is, once he was dead, the officials in Hamilton County pretty much said, okay, case closed. We're done here.
Yeah, because
And
they don't wanna have to do all that work.
no,
I mean, and it would make them look bad because they're gonna be finding all of these bones for all these missing people, and it would cost the department money, it would cost taxpayer money, and it would make the department look bad. So I
yep.
totally get why they're like, "Yay, we're just gonna brush this under the rug and keep going."
We just don't have to. So all of these families who suspected their loved one was a victim, all of these families had no answers. And when they reached out to officials and said, I want to find out if my loved one is on that property, they were told, okay, pay for it yourself. And so you're looking at forensic testing, close to $20,000. And there is a hero in this story. In the Hulu documentary, there is a forensic examiner who is in Hamilton County. His name is Jeff. If you watch the documentary, you will get to know Jeff. And Jeff just found it to be unacceptable that these victims were not going to be identified. And so there is a team of people that are working together to identify the victims on the property. They've not identified all of them. They have still not even excavated the whole piece of land. And as of today, and actually just last week, victim number 10 was identified.
Wow.
And what's most interesting about this dude, his name is Daniel Thomas Halloran, and he was not on the list of people they suspected being there. So they had a list of men that had been reported missing, that had been suspected victims. Daniel Thomas Halloran was not one of them. And so that just is even further puzzling of, oh my gosh, how many people really are here. And the estimates were 12, at least based on the stories. There were 12, but there are 10 identified now, and the work is still ongoing. And that is, when you think about a place like Indiana and the kind of reputation that Indiana tends to get on the national stage with being kind of backwards and kind of slow. And I mean, I think the fact that we can't even legalize medical marijuana and it's 2025, I think that speaks to how slow Indiana is. And the fact that the victims were not taken seriously, the reports of them being missing were not taken seriously. They did not want to expend any of the resources to test these remains. And we are 20 years later and discovering somebody that we didn't even know was there, that we didn't
Yeah,
even
so how many
suspect or
more
think
are
that. How
there
many more are there? And
that we
there
didn't
is
even
still
know?
more work on the property to be done. And there is still, families have to step forward and give DNA samples because that's how they're finding these folks. That's how they're identifying who they are, is through that familial DNA tie. So people are stepping forward, but if somebody moved here and they didn't have family, or they did, no, who
What if
knows?
they were just visiting? If they were just
Yeah,
visiting
just visiting.
Indy and going to a bar.
Yeah, they could have
Yeah.
been, and nobody knew that they were gone, or they are somebody who left home because they lived maybe in a more rural part of Indiana that was not going to accept the fact they were gay, and they moved to Indy and nobody knew that they went missing. Just thought,
Right.
just kind of lost track of them. So
Right,
there
and there
are,
wasn't a way to stay connected to people like there are now. It's not
yes,
like we had, Facebook everybody was on, or TikTok and everybody was
mm-mm,
on and would connect with their people. It was in, like, phone calls. Long distance phone calls were expensive. I mean, it
yes,
was very different in the '90s and earlier, so yeah, it makes sense to me when you say they tracked somebody that wasn't even on the list because of
yes.
the time period. But at the same time, this wasn't very long ago. So a lot of these people, these victims, have families still alive today.
Oh, yes. Yep, they have families all over, and a lot of them participated in the documentary and talked about, this process and not knowing what
We should
happened.
do a follow-up on one of your shows with if more information comes out, because it sounds like they're going to be finding more victims' names soon.
They will, yes.
Because of this documentary and because of this great guy that's decided we should do this, these people deserve justice.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah. So
Yeah.
that is a nice thing. One thing that makes me feel a little bit better, because we're living in slightly dark times in Indiana in 2025, is just to think back to the 90s. The
Mm,
majority of people now are much more accepting of people that are gay or just in the pride community, and I'm just really thankful for that. Like, I live close to Corden, and at the end of June, we're gonna have a Corden Pride Festival. I'm sure I'll do a live show about it, for Project Next, and that's a beautiful thing. And
yeah,
people come to that every year and say, "I can't believe Corden has a pride festival." Now, there were some people that tried to stop it, but
of course.
they weren't
Yep.
successful, because there's more people that accept the pride community than people that are fear it. So we gotta think of that in these dark times. There are more of us.
There's a beautiful pride community in Hamilton County as well.
Nice.
Carmel Pride, they will put on some great events this June, and, to contrast with that, I mean, that is something nice, especially for us being in Indiana, and we hate being kind of the punching bag of everyone else when they wanna make jokes about some backwards folk. But, just this week in the state of Iowa, they introduced legislation to outlaw same-sex marriage. And Iowa was one of the first states to legalize it.
Wow.
So here we are, God, 15 years after that was done. We're 10 years or so out of Obergefell, 12 years out of Obergefell at the Supreme Court. And legislation like this is designed to make it up to the Supreme Court to get challenged, to strike down Obergefell. And we already have two Supreme Court justices, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, on the record saying they think Obergefell was wrong and they would
Yeah,
overturn
that
it.
is a concern we have to watch. Our friend of Project Next, Dan Cannon, was one of the lawyers on that case to the
Yep.
Supreme Court. And he wrote a book called Pleading Out, which is where I know a lot about this, about who's getting arrested. I got that from Dan Cannon. Um, And I was talking to Tim Peck this week, and a bunch of experts are saying, yes, this is a possibility. Obergefell is the case that allowed gay marriage to be allowed
Marriage
in all 50
equality, yeah.
states, marriage
Mhm.
equality, yeah. And they're saying, yes, it could be struck down and go back to the states like they did with Roe v. Wade and
Yeah.
abortion access. So this is a concern.
Yes, it is
Yes,
a concern.
and we do need to be paying attention, and we need to try to get everybody registered to vote, make sure they understand to vote at the primary next May and to vote in November in 2026. And we need to be electing people that are going to protect our freedoms.
Yep, and I mean that we've come a long way in Indiana, we've come a long way in Hamilton County, but I really started thinking about this documentary and about Hamilton County as a whole when our lieutenant governor made some comments last week about the three-fifths compromise. And for anybody who's not familiar, Indiana has a lieutenant governor named Micah Beckwith, who is, he's 41, 42 years old. He is still a pastor at a church called Life Church in Noblesville. He's still getting a salary as a pastor. Like, he didn't quit his day job when he became lieutenant governor. And he is he's a self-proclaimed Christian nationalist. He spouts a lot of white supremacist talking points, and the three-fifths compromise, quote, being a great thing, is a talking point of white supremacy and Christian
And
nationalism.
three
And
fifths compromise is just explain that for people if they
oh
don't know
yeah,
what
so
that
the
means.
three-fifths compromise was a compromise struck in the U.S. Constitution in the 1780s to count three-fifths of the slave population for purposes of congressional appropriation.
So they were
So
counted as three-fifths of a person.
of a person. So the southern states wanted to be able to count their slaves as full people. Of course, the slaves wouldn't get to vote, but they just wanted to count them as full people to get more congressional representation. And so the northern states said absolutely not, and so they came to this compromise called the Three-Fifths Compromise. And Micah Beckwith claims that it was a brilliant move and it led to the end of slavery, and it was not discriminatory at all. And we know how problematic that is. And so I started thinking about,
I mean, Micah Beckwith is so bad
he's
that
terrible.
our governor, Mike Braun, has like tried to distance himself from Micah Beckwith. Like the three-fifths compromise was the thing that finally did it. Mike Braun
Yeah,
finally came out and said he shouldn't have said that. Mike Braun wouldn't have said that. And that was so interesting that that's what it took for Mike Braun to finally distance himself to the lieutenant governor, which was not Mike Braun's pick. He did not want that guy to be his lieutenant governor. So we're having a lot of stuff going on in Indiana over
yeah.
here, and it's important to realize the majority of us are not like this. The majority of us
So
are not extreme. The majority of Republicans in this state are not extreme like this. We just have unequal playing field, and because of gerrymandering and because of all these plans, we've elected terrible people
yep.
that are making extreme laws and hurting all Hoosiers.
And it was really, and I'm making the connection, between Baumeister and Micah Beckwith, not because what they have done is similar, it's not even close to being similar, but they're both from Hamilton County. And so
Oh.
the forces that were in place in the 1990s that treated gay men as less dead and treated these crimes as, these victims, oh, they just ran away. A lot of those same forces are still in place. That still leads to someone like Micah Beckwith having an extraordinary amount of support because he is anti-gay. He is very misogynistic when he talks about the role that women should play. He does have racist tendencies when he spouts these things about
So
slaves.
are you saying there seems to be a pocket of that Christian nationalism, that judgmentalness in this county, even though the county also has a ton of progressive, caring, non-judgmental people? There's also this group, maybe.
It was more that if you are someone who is just watching the news And you are hearing Hamilton County as related to Herb Baumeister and Hamilton County as related to Micah Beckwith, and you know nothing else about Indiana, it's probably going to confirm whatever bias you have about the state of Indiana. And so the parallels to me of the conservative social forces, cultural forces that were in play in the 1990s are still in play today and are still supporting someone like Micah Beckwith. And that kind of white Christian heterosexual ideology that is the right way and everything else is quote the wrong way is very much present. It's very much present not only in Hamilton County, but in the state as a whole. We can see this kind of behavior in our legislature. And so there are cultural forces that allowed these kind of crimes to happen that are still allowing someone like Micah Beckwith to say this publicly and proudly, and not only not apologize for it and not even take the stupid video down. He just doubles down and he repeats what he says.
I
Um,
feel like he's just one of those people that doesn't admit wrong or learn or grow, because whenever this got pretty big attention when he said
That's
the
that,
three-fifths
which is kind of
compromise.
why I'm saying like this is
Yeah,
the
he got a
attention that
lot
Hamilton
of
County is
attention.
getting, y'all. Like it's
Yeah,
not
Mike
good.
Braun finally went out against him, and he doesn't like say, I thought about it and that wasn't right. I apologize. I don't believe that. He just keeps saying it harder.
Yeah.
And it is sort of fascinating. My hope, since there are so many great Republicans in the state of Indiana, my hope is that more of them keep coming out and saying, Micah Beckwith is too extreme. He also does not support the separation of church and state. He really wants his version of Christian nationalism to be the main religion in Indiana, when we're not supposed to sponsor any religion. We're supposed to let people be whatever they want or not have a religion if they want. And I am waiting for that. At least Mike Braun did it, but we need more people to step up and say this guy is too extreme, because until we do that, we're going to keep welcoming him. He's been down here tons. He's
Hmm.
the keynote speaker at multiple Republican held events down in southern Indiana. And like, when are these people going to say, nope, he shouldn't come? And part of the problem is most of them don't know. Most of them don't know what he's doing. They just see the good things from Micah Beckwith, which I
Hmm.
don't know what those are, but like, I talked to some people off the record that are prominent Republicans in our community, and they have told me things like, well, I didn't know him, but people told me he's a good Christian man. So we've got to get the word out better to our friends that maybe don't listen to our news or our podcasts or whatever. We need to get the word out to them who Micah Beckwith is and what his agenda is for our state. Because I'm telling you, my Republican friends do not know when I say it to them. They have no idea what I'm talking about. And these are people that listen to news, but they're picking different news that they're listening to.
And we have to stop using the word Christian as an automatic synonym for good or moral, because it's still a defense that's used in, you'll see it as a defense in criminal trials. Well, I found God. So, I'm a reformed Christian, or I'm a born again Christian, that therefore I am a good person. And those things do not always go together, as we know. So this kind of getting a pass for someone like Micah Beckwith, who can say these awful things, um, giving him a pass because he's a Christian, because he's a pastor. We no, we can't do that. And
Yeah.
we also need to hold our lawmakers accountable, because what you'll see with someone like Governor Mike Braun is Mike Braun is not as outspoken as Micah Beckwith. Micah Beckwith kind of flies off the handle. He's much more present on social media. Mike Braun is kind of your typical old school politician in a way, where he's much quieter, but the policies align. And when you hear someone, um, Micah Beckwith, so part of the reason, I'll just go down a little bit of a trail here, but part of the reason that this narrative about the three-fifths compromise not being discriminatory is really important to this group of Christian nationalists is because they need to prove that the United States was not actually founded as a racist country. So if it was not founded as being racist or discriminatory, then racism and discrimination doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, white privilege doesn't exist. And if that doesn't exist, then we don't need DEI.
It's people
And
taking
so
things so personally. They're taking
and
things so personally, and it's
so
like,
whatever Mike Braun wants to say, if he wants to condemn what Micah Beckwith said, fine. But
but
Mike
don't
Braun
vote with him.
also worked to dismantle DEI protections and initiatives in the state of Indiana. So
Yeah.
he can say, "Oh, what I hear when Mike Braun says that is, I wish Micah wouldn't have said that out loud." I'm
Yes.
fine that he thinks that.
It,
I'm fine.
right.
I probably agree with him. And that's what Micah Beckwith said. He came out and said, Governor Braun and I are aligned on this. And I tend to believe him. I believe him when he says that because the hard stance that someone like Governor Braun took against DEI, took against racial and sex and gender attempts for equality, that tells me that you are also supportive of this kind of talking point. And even if he wishes, I think that's what a lot of this is. Braun doesn't necessarily disagree with Beckwith.
He just wouldn't say it aloud.
He doesn't want him to say it out
He
loud.
wants to just sign bad bills into law
Yes.
quietly without people knowing.
And
He's
that's
not
where
gonna
like the whole
announce it like Micah Beckwith is.
the whole joke of like, oh, you said the quiet part out loud. Like that's really what Beckwith is doing. Like
Yeah.
we're legislating that way, Micah. Can you just let me legislate that way and stop saying this part out loud? That's really when you look at the policies, because there's no doubt to me that if Obergefell falls, Indiana will outlaw marriage equality.
Yes.
I mean,
We will be one of the first
will be
states
one
to
of the
do it.
first, and they will
Yes.
love it. They will love every
Mike
second of
Braun
it.
has made comments about that.
Hmm.
Yes. Yes.
So
So
the
I
force
did a
is,
show yesterday with Mad Voters with Kelly DeLong where we
yeah,
talked about some of the bad bills that became law in Indiana and that will be hitting us soon.
there's
And
so many.
yeah, no, we didn't get through it. There's gonna have to be a part 2 and
Yep,
probably a part 3.
I'm sure.
We decided we're probably gonna put it into sections of topics and talk about those laws. But
Oh, good.
the thing that she said that surprised me was every single piece of legislation that the state house and the state senate passed through to the governor's desk that he had to sign into law. He could say no or he could sign it into law. He signed every single thing that was on his desk into law.
Hmm.
So it's almost like, why are we even having a governor? He did not say like, this is too terrible, this is going to hurt public education, or taking away funds for the public schools for the blind like they did. They took away funding for that. He could have said, no to some things, and our governor is choosing to use none of his power other than to say yes to every terrible law that we just got passed. And
Hmm.
I did not realize that. I was thinking he was saying no to some of them. So that was
And
surprising.
even, I mean, no, he didn't say no to any of them. And part of it is some of it would have been ceremonial, if he want they have a veto proof
Oh, that's
majority.
right.
And so
That's right.
they
They
would
could just go
overturn his
back.
veto.
So he doesn't really even have a lot of power because of the
There
supermajority,
were a
right?
couple there were a couple of bills that were actually closer than a straight party line vote that maybe could have died with a veto,
Like
but
the partisan school board.
the school board bill that would not have survived a
Right.
veto,
That
or
would have
that
been great if he would have said no to that one.
but he didn't. So there were a couple of other bills that where he could have, but it would have been ceremonial. It just
That's
would have been a
interesting. I
political
forgot about
position.
that.
Yeah, that they just would have overridden his veto, and it would have made more work for them. And they don't want to come back once session is over. They want to be done, so they are hoping that he'll sign everything, so they don't have to come back and adjourns or and
Do more
reconvene.
work. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's so it is just for me the timing of this documentary coming out and Micah Beckwith saying these things and putting Indiana on because this did get national coverage. So kind of putting Indiana and this specific county in Indiana on the map, making a first impression to a lot of people, and it's not a good first impression.
Right.
That just some of the we have a lot of work to do. And when you think about this was only the 90s, we're only 20 years later, 30 years later. We still have a lot of work to do, and there has been incredible progress made.
But we
But
need a lot more, and we need a lot more in our local government, local and state
yes,
government. Yeah.
yep,
And if you are depressed about Hamilton County, one of our favorite Project Next people lives there, Josh Lowry.
Yeah, he's
Josh
wonderful, and
Lowry
he's the
is the
new head of
chair
the yeah.
of the Democratic Party, and he was on Project Next just a couple weeks ago. So there's a lot of amazing people in Hamilton
A lot of
County.
amazing people in here, including Jeff, the forensic examiner, and
Way to
his
go, Jeff.
team
Thank
who was
you for
working tirelessly to identify all of these victims and hopefully give the families some peace and some closure. And if you're interested, the documentary is on Hulu, Fox Hollow Murders. You can go watch it, and you can also, if there are family members in the area or people who want to submit DNA samples so it can be tested against the remains, that's also an option.
I just want to send love to all of the family and friends that have been affected by this horrible man. I'm so sorry. And I hope that us talking about this, I hope we didn't do anything that hurt your feelings or anything because it's such a sensitive topic. And
Mhm.
yeah, I'm just so sorry that this
And
happened.
I
And I,
mean, there are so many people and families that are still around. That's what we talk, that you throw a rock into the pond and it's just, it ripples. It ripples and ripples. And this is generational trauma for sure.
yeah,
And
yeah.
to think of how many people went to the place that they're supposed to go. They went to the police. That's where you're supposed to go when you need help, and you're turned away, or you're not given the answer that you want. So there are a lot of wrongs that need to be righted, and that's kind of, when we talk about it not being so much as a bad apple, but a broken system that needs reform. That's one of the areas where we can talk about it, because when we look at the cases in Elkhart, Indiana, there's been one person terminated. They ended up resigning before they were actually fired, but there's no personal accountability. None of the mistakes or oversights of any of these law enforcement officers in Hamilton County have none of those have been investigated. None of those folks have ever been held accountable. So
And it takes more work. I feel
yes,
like a
it
lot of
takes a
times it's
long
not that
time.
necessarily that these people are bad that are in positions of power, but they're busy and it costs money and budgets are getting cut. I get why they don't want to go back. And then it's also very painful to look back at people and say, you should have done this. It's really hard. I just don't see it done enough in our culture. Yes, we need to take accountability when racism, when homophobia, whatever is the reason justice wasn't served.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a tricky thing because it's not right and wrong, it's gray area, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. And so I see the complex problem, and I think you talking about it today and informing me and our viewers helps bridge the gap to this is messy, this is hard, and it needs to be done.
And we need to focus on the heroes, the people who step up and want to right the wrongs. And we can also look at what kind of safeguards are in place, what kind of checks and balances are in place. Is there a formal process? I mean, I think we have stopped kind of assuming that everybody runs away, because not as many people run away as you think run away. And so this stopping to say, oh, well, they're just a teenager, they were upset and they ran away. It's like, no, nope, they did not. And that kind of formalization of that kind of process, anything that can remove subjectivity from individual officers. Of course, they need discretion, they need to be able to make decisions in real time, but certain areas where we need reform, where we need things to be done differently, it has to be a across the board process that we are going to treat all of these people the same, and then go from there with an investigation. But you have to kind of start at the same baseline, so you're not treating victims as more important than the other.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, thank you for doing this. I know that Jason Kerberg said on our show that we did last Wednesday, if you want to watch that and hear what it's like to be a cop in Southern Indiana, he said he wants more trainings. He said
Mhm.
police officers need more trainings. They need trainings to make sure they're not turning away cases. They need trainings on how to handle when they come in with a he said a lot of things they have to deal with are like relationship fights, you know,
Mhm.
the fights and they're going in their home and they're fighting and they could be violent. It's very scary. He said they need a lot of training for how to handle that to keep everybody safe. And I just think this should be part of it. They need training to make sure that they're not using their negative cultural views to say no to someone who needs protection.
And there have been, I will give some credit to the Elkhart Police Department for some changes that have been made over the last several years. And one of those key changes that is being adopted in other places is they have a social workers department now within the police department,
Oh,
because we've known this for a long time in law enforcement. There are plenty of issues that are not law enforcement issues. They are actually social issues, but the police are the ones that
the
are called.
police have to deal with
Yep.
all of it.
For
They have to deal,
mental illness,
especially
for
when
domestic
our
violence,
government
for
doesn't do a good job of taking care of people, the
Mhm.
cops have to deal with all of it. So the cops are in charge of homelessness. That shouldn't be a cop's issue.
No.
Cops are having to deal with all of the addiction, a lot of addiction issues.
Mhm.
And so yeah, you're so right. They're getting stuck with everything. So they need at least training.
Yep.
And then we need to support the community better so that they're not the first ones to handle these problems. There should be other things in place so it doesn't get that bad.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to attempt to, because if all you're doing is, dealing with someone who is dealing with substance abuse or violence issues or mental health issues, arresting them and then releasing them, nobody's solving the problem. And so a lot of these police departments are recognizing, oh, I need a social worker with me. And so the social worker is actually the one that is intervening, that is handling somebody with a mental health break, is handling somebody in a domestic violence situation. So this is it needs to change, and it can change going forward. But yeah, there are still it, the Elkhart series, if anybody wants to read it, it's called Lawless. It's in the Indy Star. There was also another series on the Elkhart Police done by ProPublica and the South Bend Tribune that started in 2018. There is just decades of hurt. And to undo that hurt, especially when you see the prosecutor who was involved in a lot of these cases is still the prosecutor in Elkhart
Mm.
County. You've not all of the police officers who were involved in these cases are no longer there, but they never faced any consequence. So you watch these people just kind of right off into the sunset, and we all know what kind of retirement packages they get. They get good ones, and to see them not face any justice while these families suffer is just it just puts more salt in the wound, and these wounds can't heal. And
We
that's
definitely need to talk more about this because it's such a complex issue. Now that I am like friends with a cop and I ask him questions, I see more of the people at the top
Mhm.
could be doing things a lot better. The people on the street, I feel like especially locally, the cops on the street here are trying the best they can, but if they had better systems in place for more support.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we
So
could definitely do a whole nother episode on the
we'll
Elkhart
have
situation
Jason
if
on
we
the show
want.
again
Yep.
too, because I asked him really hard questions and he was completely fine with answering them the way he felt. And it made me
Yep.
feel a lot better about our community just on the way he is.
Which is
But
what we need. We need people
right.
who are willing to be honest. Yeah.
I would really like the current sheriff of Floyd County, Steve Bush. I would really like him to come on the show because he's going to be in a primary with Jason.
Yeah.
So he has an invitation to come on the show if he wants to take it or not. Um, but we do need to talk about it more often. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can get off here. We went a little long, but I want to say there is going to be an exciting new show on Monday. Well, not new, but we're going to have Tim Peck is going to be on his show that he does with his uncle, who is a Catholic priest. It's called a priest and a doctor walk into a podcast, a doctor and a priest walk into a podcast. Yeah,
Yes.
that show's going to be Monday around lunchtime, and they're going to talk about the new pope because that
Mhm.
just happened yesterday.
An American
So,
pope.
and a Midwest, or is that where it is? A Chicago.
It's a Chicago pope.
Yeah, so
Chicago.
that's exciting. So hear all about that on our Monday episode, and it'll be nice to have Tim back. We haven't seen him in a few weeks. Well, I've seen him, but you all haven't had shows with him, so that'll be nice. And then new stuff's coming up. I'm meeting a lot of people within the community, and then I'll have them on the shows more often. So I'm doing a lot of that, but exciting stuff. And then Wendy Tantchester is going to be on the show on the 22nd. She is a state house elected official. So we will have one on our show. You've had one. You've had a state official on the show, right?
Yes. Yeah, I had Representative Bauer on, Maureen Bauer.
So this will be our second one. Yeah, so that's cool. So you guys have a fantastic week. Corinne, thanks for being badass.
Thank
And
you.
I bet you could tell me just so much stuff about your your serial killer knowledge.
Oh, I could go on forever. Yeah,
Yeah.
we didn't even scratch the surface of her Baumeister. No.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And then let us know what you thought about the episode and if you have seen the Hulu show. What's it called? Fox what?
Fox Hollow Murders.
Fox Hollow Murders. You can
Mhm.
watch that out now. So,
Yep.
yeah, thanks everybody. Please share, please subscribe to YouTube. One of my friends invited all of her Facebook friends yesterday, and we picked up about 60 or 70 new followers. So
Oh, that's awesome.
when you go to Facebook and you go to Project Next and you click the three dots next to message and you invite your friends, that helps us so much. So I just want to shout out to Jama because Jama did that for me. And
Thank
that
you,
was really
Jayla.
sweet. That was really sweet of her. So thanks for everybody. Also, some people have been sharing our shows more often. We're having some people on TikTok, some people on Facebook. They're sharing the YouTube channel. Thank you. Please do that. Please. That helps so much.
It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. Thanks, Corinne. Have a fantastic
Thank
week. And we'll be back
you. You
soon for
too.
next episode.
Yes, we will. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye.